Do you know about Aceh? Aceh as an independent nation? When people talk about ethnic cleansing, they talk about Palestine. When they talk about suffering, they talk about Rwanda. When they talk about apartheid, they mention South Africa. When they talk about massacres, they remember Srebrenica. When they talk about genocide, they recall Armenia. And when they talk about tsunami, they think of Thailand. But what about Aceh? When Britain, the Dutch, the USA, and Japan worked together to destroy us, and everyone stayed silent, Aceh was burning. In December 1945, the earth shook not from an earthquake, but from the Kumbak massacre, when Dutch colonial officers and the newborn Indonesian army together slaughtered the descendants of the Sultanate, the ulama, and villagers. Women were raped before being shot, children were burned alive inside munasahs, and royal families erased. In 1 month, 200 people died, more than 50 royal houses burned, and rivers ran red. That was the beginning of an 80-year silence. Do you know what silence does? It kills truth. After Kumbak came decades of new massacres, 1952 to 2005, a slow, organized genocide under military rule. In 23 regions, more than 50,000 children were killed, 20,000 raped to death, tens of thousands disappeared, and thousands more detained. Behind every number is a child whose name never made it to your reports. Their graves have no markers. Their mothers still wait. When you drive through Aceh, you see new schools, new roads, and offices. But under them lie mass graves, at least 200 sites recorded. Beneath those roads are bones of children bayoneted, burned, or drowned by Indonesian soldiers. But in Aceh, peace became the new name for occupation. Before they tried to erase us, Aceh was a great civilization. We had our own currency of gold and silver stamped with the names of our women kings and sultans, traded across the Indian Ocean. Our ports thrived alongside cities like Salem long before America existed. We are kind, polite, and cultured people who welcome those around us. We created one of the world's first naval forces led by women, admirals and captains who protected our waters and our honor. We were the first civilization in Southeast Asia, the root from which others grew. We shared our knowledge, culture, and art across oceans through what the world now calls Batu Aceh, our lasting stone legacy that carried stories to distant lands. We signed treaties with over 40 nations, from the Ottoman Empire to Britain and France. We were renowned seafarers whose ships ruled the Indian Ocean, and our scholars shaped the Malay world. The Acehnese language, the root of Malay, carried knowledge across Asia and Africa. Our society was gender-balanced. Women ruled as kings, taught as ulama, and commanded fleets. We were a nation of law, intellect, and beauty long before colonization. This is not ancient history. It is a wound that never closed. I speak as a descendant of the Sultanate of Aceh, whose laws, the Kanun Mayukuta Alam, once defined justice as divine duty. We had our own constitution, our own treaties with Ottoman, British, Portuguese, and Dutch, long before Indonesia was invented. We were a nation, yet our sovereignty was erased, our people declared rebels, our children called terrorists, our women collateral. Indonesia calls itself a republic, but its birth certificate was signed in colonial ink. Between 1952 and 2005, over 150,000 Acehnese were killed, 50,000 of them children, more than 30,000 women raped, 70,000 homes burned, 5 million hectares of land stolen. The same land now produces oil, gas, gold, and timber that enrich others while our people live poor beside their ancestors' bones. The Helsinki MoU brought peace, but only for the perpetrators. The victims remained buried. Do you know what an Acehnese mother prays for? Not revenge, just truth. She prays for the names of her daughters, Fitriani, Aisha, Nurul Azmi, Rahma Kut Zahra, Sifa, to be written somewhere. She prays for the names of her sons, Yusuf, Rahman, Iskandar, burned alive in their classrooms in Rumo Gudong, Bati Iliek, Blang Mangat, Matang Ubi. Do you know what our ulama said? Silence in the face of injustice is the loudest sin. For 80 years, the world documented every horror in Aceh. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the United Nations, the European Union, BBC, CNN, every major institution wrote our story. They published thousands of reports about us, our murdered families, our raped children, our stolen land. Every world leader of that era knew what was happening, and still, no one acted. They watched the genocide unfold in real time, with satellite images and briefings on their desks. BBC filmed our villages burning. CNN aired our mothers crying. HRW called it systematic. Amnesty called it torture. The UN called it internal, and the world called it silence. You cannot claim ignorance when you held the evidence in your hands. The truth was broadcast in daylight, printed in your languages and carried in your cables. The archives of truth exist, but the conscience of the world remains dead. We do not need witnesses anymore. We need courage. We need justice. Aceh is not a province to be pitied, but a nation with full legal rights to independence. Every treaty we signed, every constitution we wrote, every law of Kanun Mukuta Alam proves our sovereignty. The world leaders knew it too. They knew Aceh as a nation unlawfully occupied and stripped of its freedom. Today, if you say Aceh, hardly anyone knows how to pronounce it. They do not know it was once one of the first great civilizations of Southeast Asia. They have forgotten that Aceh was written on the world's maps not as a province, but as a nation that shaped trade, faith, and culture. And then God sent the tsunami to our land, not as punishment, but as a cry to the world to finally see us. The world wept for us, but only for the water, not the war. It was meant to make the world look, and it did. Yet in the Western world, Britain and the USA silenced us again. They shifted the spotlight. Thailand got more attention, more cameras, more sympathy, while Aceh, the true epicenter of grief, was buried again under diplomacy and silence. The world gathered $7.2 billion for Aceh's recovery. Aid raised in the name of compassion. But 60% of that compassion was stolen, laundered, or sold back through foreign contractors and generals. The world called it reconstruction. We called it robbery. The British Red Cross raised $70 million, but none of it reached the Acehnese people. If you ask where the money went, ask your leadership, Sir Nicholas Young, Matthias Schmale, and Rohan Hawavicenti. You raised millions in our name, yet our people still suffer. I have read your Red Cross principles. Humanity, impartiality, neutrality, independence, voluntary service, unity, universality. I ask you, where were these principles when our children were trafficked from refugee tents? Where were they when food convoys were looted under the same emblem of protection? Where are they now, when the bones of our children lie in 1,200 unmarked graves? When the Red Cross speaks of neutrality, remember this: neutrality without truth is complicity. You cannot call it humanitarian aid if it is guarded by those who killed the people it was meant to save. Just after the tsunami, between February and June 2005, Aceh faced a new disaster: the trafficking of its orphans. In Banda Aceh and Meulabo, children who survived the waves were stolen from hospitals, tents, and mosques. Their names were written on cardboard. Rahmat, 7 years old, parents lost. N, 10 years, mother dead. Those names vanished, taken by men wearing vests marked Social Foundation, many working under official protection. Behind their disappearances stood Letkol Muhammad Iqbal, AKBP Ridwan Nasution, Doctors Rachmadi Yusuf, Nir Lilis Rachmadi Yusuf, Major Yudi Fadila, Bripka Tegu Wibowo, and foreign NGO operators who used adoption as camouflage for abduction. They were not rescuers, they were thieves of our children. A mother in a mosque tent said, "I lost my son twice, first to the wave, then to the men who promised to save him." The trafficking of Acehnese orphans was not a crime of poverty, it was a crime of power, protected by uniforms and embassies. The same men who stole aid money also stole our children. UNICEF 2005 and BBC Orphan Traffickers reports confirm this. Organized adoption rings moved children from Aceh to Medan, Jakarta, Batam, Malaysia, Singapore, and Australia. The perpetrators hid behind NGOs, churches, and official seals. They wore compassion like a uniform while profiting from loss. So today I refuse silence. Because every statistic you have ever seen from Aceh is not a number. It is a life. Each figure buried in reports hides a child whose laughter once echoed through our villages, a mother's heartbeat that never stopped calling their name. My name, Sultan Fariz Saya, is not just a survivor's name. It carries every one of those children. I stand here to speak what they never could. That is what it means to be Acehnese. We are told to move on, to forgive. But forgiveness without truth is not healing, it is burial. So today, before this Red Cross assembly, I speak for my people and every human who still believes that compassion is not a policy. It is a duty. Not charity, not sympathy. Recognition. Open your archives. Acknowledge that what happened in Aceh was genocide. That the world's silence fed it. That neutrality in the face of atrocity is betrayal. Let the Red Cross become not a witness to our suffering, but a partner in justice. Because somewhere tonight, in a village outside Sigli or Mulabo, an old woman is still lighting a candle beside an empty bed, whispering the name of a child who never came home. And she believes, somewhere, someone will finally listen. Let that someone be you. From the ashes of Kumbuk 1945 to the camps of 2005, the pattern never changed. The Kumbuk massacre was not only a bloodletting, it was a blueprint, a test of how colonial cruelty could be reborn through a new flag. The Dutch rifles of 1945 became the Indonesian rifles of 1952, then the Brimob and TNI guns of 1998. The same doctrine of annihilation, erase the royals, silence the ulama, terrorize the poor, was reborn in every generation. Kumbuk was the prototype of the Republic's violence. It merged conquest with bureaucracy, massacre with governance. Britain and the USA were behind it. The international silence that began in 1945 still echoes. The world watched Dutch and Indonesian troops destroy the Acehnese monarchy and did nothing. 60 years later, when the tsunami struck, the same silence returned, wrapped in the language of humanitarian aid. The Red Cross, the UN, and the EU repeated the same mistake. They came to save lives but refused to confront the killers who still held power. The genocide of Aceh was not only physical, it was epistemic. They burned our archives, rewrote our textbooks, and erased our sovereignty from memory. That is why we speak now. Because remembrance is resistance. To restore Aceh's memory is to defy 80 years of deliberate forgetting. This fight continues, not in secret, but in the open. I carry it through every platform I can reach. My books on Amazon, my voice on TikTok, Irait Fariz, my posts on Instagram and Twitter, Sultan Fariz, and through acehgov.org. These are not tools of fame but of remembrance. They are proof that the spirit of Aceh cannot be erased, that even after 8 decades of violence we stand unbroken, turning memory into action. And let this truth stand in defiance of hypocrisy. Today, the same republic that murdered our children now crowns their killers as heroes. On 10 November 2025, Indonesia declared Suharto, the dictator who ordered the torture and killing of Acehnese children, a national hero. They did the same for Sarwo Edi Wibowo, the commander whose own hands carried out executions and rapes in Aceh, Timor-Leste, and Papua. How can a nation honor men whose names are written in blood? Their victims were not statistics, they were children. Yusrina binti Hassan, 11, beaten to death by Suharto in Loksiumawe. M. Yasin bin Usman, 12, executed in Bireuen. Nur Asia binti Idris, 10, abused at the ExxonMobil compound. Salma binti Abdullah, 9, shot in Tangse by Sarwo Edi. Khadija binti Mahmud, 8, raped at Sulemeum. Umi Salama binti Farid, 10, killed in Burunuen. These are the names they forgot to mention when they pinned medals on murderers. A government that rewards mass murder with national honors commits a second genocide, this time against memory itself. It tells every mother her child's death means nothing, that the killers have become saints. The Red Cross, the UN, and Europe must not remain neutral in the face of such corruption of truth. We demand international accountability. Remove these names from your ceremonies, your partnerships, your diplomacy. Stop funding governments that glorify those who killed children. Because when a state calls criminals heroes, it calls humanity a lie. This is why Aceh still speaks, because our silence would make us complicit. Truth is not vengeance, it is survival, and we will not let the world forget again. When they talk about ethnic cleansing, they will talk about Palestine. They forgot about us Acehnese, a great and independent nation that experienced complete cleansing, yet they ignored us. When they talk about suffering, they talk about Rwanda, but we, the people of Aceh, kind, generous, and gentle, endured unspeakable violence while the world looked away. When they talk about apartheid, they mention South Africa, but they do not remember our people were tortured and erased from their own land. When they talk about massacres, they remember Srebrenica, yet forget the Kumbak massacre that burned our royals, scholars, and children alive. When they talk about genocide, they recall Armenia, but they do not speak of the genocide in Aceh that lasted for decades. And when they talk about tsunami, they think of Thailand, but not of Aceh, the place where the ocean rose to cry for justice. They forgot us when we lived, and they forgot us when we died. But one day when they talk about the conscience of humanity, they will finally remember Aceh. And when history writes the next chapter, let it say Aceh did not rise only to mourn, but to lead. Let it say, from the ruins of our mosques and the ashes of our children's schools, we rebuilt a nation that still believes in justice, compassion, and truth. We do not ask for sympathy. We demand recognition, dignity, and the return of our rightful place among free nations. Because we were never the broken ones. We are proof that even when the world abandons you, faith and courage can still make a people stand tall. Sultan Fariz Shah, 12th November 2025, Sheffield, UK.